This very console was so much a part of my life for many years back in the early 70s.
This is not just a console, board, or mixing desk. The terms are fairly interchangeable, but one of the classics, now living here in a Los Angeles studio some 6,000 miles away from Abbey Road Studios, where once its circuitry injected magic into the sound of Pink Floyd, Paul McCartney, and a host of legendary artists of the 1970s and 80s.
I almost felt I could just sit down and make another record just like I did in the old days. This, believe it or not, is the very console used for a number of records that I worked on. There's one in particular, it's called Dark Side of the Moon. And I'm kind of feeling very, very sort of almost shaking with the memory of this thing. Extraordinary. It's now owned by a gentleman called Kevin Agunas, who's got this wonderful wide open space here in North Hollywood. And he's dedicated his career to making this console continue to work, along with a bunch of other great vintage gear. Great to be back. There's endless speculation as to why these artists and those records sounded the way they did. Was it the analog tape machines? Was it the desk, the studio, the engineer, the songwriting, the playing? Almost certainly a combination of all of them. But one thing is for certain. As soon as multitrack recording became widely available in the 1960s, the only way those multiple tracks could be mixed down to a mono or stereo tape for duplication was using a surface something like this.
Although analog consoles like this are still used in major recording studios, a common sight nowadays is the digital console, or more recently, the digital audio workstation controller. These all tend to look very similar, with row upon row of faders and knobs, and indeed they do perform many of the same functions, but there are crucial differences. The biggest difference concerns how the audio is being processed and then output. Either it remains a series of analog electrical pulses, as on an analog console, or those electrical pulses get digitized or converted into the digital domain as a stream of ones and zeros as they are on a digital console.
As digital recording developed, it wasn't long before the recording of audio reached the world of the personal computer, complete with graphical representations of mixing desks or virtual consoles on the screen. And so the digital audio workstation was born. This was particularly attractive and very cost-effective for home studios, but how practical was it to mix hundreds of tracks of audio with a mouse? The digital audio workstation controller simply acts as a front end, a set of dummy knobs and faders, if you will, for the processing that's actually taking place inside the computer. Controllers communicate with the computer using either basic MIDI or, more commonly right now, their own proprietary high-resolution control language. However they communicate, what's important is that the control data can be recorded within the song file, which means that the various functions it controls can be recalled and used for automation. Automation, in some form, has become a standard part of the mixing process. In the old days, before automation, you might have seen 3 or 4 people at a mixing desk adjusting levels and tweaking effects in real time as the individual tracks were mixed down to a stereo master. If those 3 or 4 people happened to be members of the band, invariably the fader that they'd be moving up, rarely down, would be their own instrument. As individual faders would go up, the engineer would be pulling down the main stereo bus fader. Chaos was inevitable.
Automation has become very important because at this point in time, recall is something that everybody in the world loves to do and does. It's funny, I think I would give the Grammy to SSL. I'd give 2 Grammys to SSL. So the one beautiful thing, aspect of this console is the fact that it's recallable, every button, every switch, every knob, every send, etc. And that's part of the reason why I'm working on this particular desk at this point.
Nowadays, countless records are made, as we say, in the box. Because of the automation possibilities, it really is possible to mix a complex record with a mouse. But having said that, if you've ever experienced mixing on a larger surface controller or console like this, it's hard to go back. We'll explore this further in the mixing section.
Mixing in the box has its beauties. There's a certain sound to it that's fantastic, actually, but it's not the same thing as mixing through an analog console. I think given the choice, anyone in the world most likely would pick that if they could, just from the standpoint that the size of the stereo spectrum, the depth and frequency response and everything that goes with that is definitely better going through an analog console than mixing in the box.
If you're going to do a great mix, it can be done in Pro Tools. It can be done totally with plugins. It's not the technology that dictates the sound of the record. It's the man that's working the technology. Because it's an analog console doesn't mean you're going to get a great mix. It's the man working the console.
The process of how audio gets into an analog desk is fairly straightforward. Mics or instruments are connected directly or via a patch bay, and it's easy to see exactly how many inputs you have at your disposal. Most engineers still label all the sound sources on a strip of masking tape for clarity.
On digital consoles and controllers, we can type in the source name and have them displayed electronically, both on the work surface and on the screen. We'll be looking at what we call the signal flow within a console in just a moment. On a digital console, what you see is not necessarily what you get. The issues are both where and how the analog to digital conversion, A to D for short, takes place. For a start, a digital console may offer its own A to Ds, or it might not, in which case you'll need to use external converters. The quality of your converters will affect the quality of your digitized audio, and some admittedly high-priced external converters have also become highly prized as well as highly priced, meaning you might even want to use them even if your console has its own A to Ds.
There are several so-called front-end rack mount units which offer a mic pre-stage, EQ, limiting, compression, and gating in various combinations. They also often include A to D conversion, as well as a regular analog output.
All the manufacturers will tell you that their front-end box is cleaner, more transparent, and more accurate than anyone else's. In general, you get what you pay for, but beware of salesmen who'll tell you that their box will give you a night and day result. The differences will, in most cases, be pretty subtle. Let your ears be the judge before you commit to hard-earned cash on such devices. You may find that the same amount is better spent on a good mic. Adding yet more murk into the pond, instruments, notably keyboard workstations, might provide some form of stereo or multi-channel digital audio output themselves using FireWire or USB connections. Here's where you need to be careful though. A 24-channel digital console might have 24 faders on it, but only have, say, 16 mic inputs and therefore only 16 A to D converters. Even more extreme, some hybrid digital analog consoles may offer 8 or 16 analog inputs, but only offer 2 channels of digital audio conversion into and out of a DAW. The moral of this cautionary tale is that when looking at any digital or digital encompassing console, you need to be clear as to exactly how many A to D converters it offers, and whether what it has is appropriate for your purpose. If you're making music essentially by yourself, you may not need many independent converters because you're only recording one thing at a time. Likewise, if you're comfortable working mainly in the box, in other words, adjusting EQs and levels within your computer and DAW, then 2 channels may be fine. It may be perfectly sufficient for your console to offer only 2 digital to analog channels that you can configure as an analog stereo output from the DAW for you to listen to. If you want to mix in the analog domain, you need as many D to A converters as you have tracks. If you want to record a live backing track, say, or a live drum kit, then you'll have to have multiple A to D converters to record simultaneously the output from multiple mics. Outbound, if you want to make use of a lot of outboard processing equipment and or have independent channel control from the physical faders, then you're looking at multiple channels of conversion. That way, each source can be heard and adjusted independently. For mixing, a digital console or DAW is quite capable of combining a large number of tracks, remaining in the digital domain for all EQ, effects and level changes. But analog traditionalists insist that combining tracks together should take place in the analog domain. This is sometimes referred to as analog summing. The counter-argument is that the conversion process needed to get the tracks undigitized so that they can be combined or mixed in the analog domain only to be redigitized for the final mix to CD or DVD is, as we Brits say, a swing and roundabout situation, or in other words, you win some and you lose some. Let's demonstrate this a simple way. Here are 4 audio sources: bass, drums, guitar and keyboards. On the screen on this DAW, it's a simple matter to set the fader levels and simply output the result to the stereo bus. If this were a finished record, the whole thing would remain in the digital domain through mastering, CD production and duplication. It only actually leaves the digital domain in the consumer's stereo system or iPod, where it undergoes its first and only digital to analog or D2A conversion process. However, we can also take those same 4 tracks and convert them individually to analog using one D2A converter for each source and mix these analog signals together using an analog console. We then re-enter the digital domain by sending the stereo analog result into an A to D converter. So what would be the difference between these 2 methods? Hearing differences in audio quality are totally subjective. But to give you an idea, we've devised a scientifically accurate comparison for demonstration purposes, where the 4 digital tracks are combined at exactly the same levels with no other processing, first in the analog domain and then in the digital domain. So we've got 4 audio sources here. I've got the bass, the drums, the keyboards and a piano. The bass is actually recorded mono across 2 tracks. And I'm going to take each of the 8 tracks and make sure that each track is being output from the analog desk at exactly the same level. I'm confident they're coming in at the same level because we've set up on the DAW that they're all running at exactly unity gain. So now all I have to do is play the tone, and we'll check the output on the meter is actually going to be at 0 on each track. Here's the first track. That's right on 0 right there. We'll check the next track. That's looking good on the right side at 0. That's the bass track. Then we come to the drum tracks, left and right, both looking right on 0. And the guitar track also looking good. And finally the piano track, all looking good at 0. So I'm going to bring them all in, so they're all going to add together now. And now we're going to play the music into the system with all 8 tracks open at exactly the same levels, and we're going to record it back into the DAW. Now we're going to go through the summing process in the digital domain. We've got the 4 incoming tracks. The top one is the bass, the yellow one is the drums, the guitar in blue, and the piano in turquoise. At the bottom of the screen there, you can see the analog mix that we created on the analog console, summing in the analog domain. So now we're going to go to the mix window, and there are the 4 incoming tracks and the analog mix track. And what we're going to do is play the tone just to see what level everything came in at and went out to the mix at. So all the incoming tracks are at the same level, and we've got a resulting output level looking pretty good. Let's play it one more time at a little bit above -3 there. So we've now got to create, which we already have. We've already created a digital track, so we're going to show that now. There it is in green, and we're going to play the tone one more time and check that the track that we're about to record this into digitally is at exactly the same level as the analog version. So let's play the tone one more time. There it is. It's exactly spot on at the same level as the analog version. So if we now go back to the edit window, all that remains to be done is record the tone and the music. It's just going to be there. So off we go. We'll just go into record, and then when we've made the pass, we'll make the comparison. In theory, at least, both these stereo results should sound exactly the same. But unfortunately, in order for you to hear it on this DVD, we have had to reconvert the analog result back into digital, or there would be no soundtrack on your DVD player or computer. So you might want to cry foul. For the full analog experience, the analog version could of course be recorded directly to analog tape for a vinyl disc transfer or compact cassette. Remember cassettes? That said,